What would you do if the very person meant to ensure your comfort and safety on a flight raised her hand against you? What if, in front of dozens of silent passengers, a flight attendant slapped you only to discover that you were the billionaire who actually owned the very skies she worked in? This is not just a story of humiliation. It is a story of dignity challenged, of silence broken, and of a woman whose calm strength forced an entire system to face itself. Inside that cabin, passengers became witnesses, and the world became a courtroom. What began as a slap turned into a movement, one that could change the way we all travel forever. But how did a simple seat dispute ignite a global firestorm? What hidden clause gave Amara Lewis the power to turn the tables in midair? And what does it mean for every single person who has ever been told, "You don't belong here"? Stay with us as we dive into the full story, a journey of power, prejudice, and the unshakable demand for dignity. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the stories that matter most. Now, let's begin. The hum of the aircraft was steady, like a low heartbeat under polished metal skin. Boarding was almost finished, the aisles quieting as passengers settled into their seats. In the front of the cabin, seat 1A by the window, Amara Lewis smoothed her scarf and placed her worn leather notebook on the side table. She had always preferred flying quietly, no entourage, no designer logos, just herself. A woman who valued stillness in a world that never seemed to stop moving. The light above flickered once, a soft reminder that the aircraft was alive. Amara closed her eyes briefly, letting the gentle vibration steady her breath. She had taken this seat countless times across dozens of routes, but today felt heavier. Maybe it was the weight of memory, or the shadows of 1,000 other journeys when strangers had looked at her and assumed she did not belong. "Excuse me," a voice cut through the calm, sharp, clipped, polished with authority. Amara opened her eyes. Before her stood Victoria Hale, the lead flight attendant, tall, precise in posture, a woman who seemed to believe her uniform was a shield and sword in one. Her eyes scanned Amara with a cold appraisal. "This seat," Victoria said, her tone flat, "is not yours." For a moment, silence pressed around them. Passengers nearby lifted their heads, curiosity sparking in the quiet cabin. Amara tilted her head gently, her voice measured. "This is my boarding pass. 1A. Victoria didn't glance at the pass. Instead, she folded her arms. Sometimes mistakes happen. People often wander where they don't belong. The words stung, more for their familiarity than their sting. Amara had heard variations of them her entire life, at receptions, in boardrooms, in clubs she legally owned shares in but was asked to sign in as a guest. Her fingers curled lightly around the notebook at her side. She breathed once, twice. Patience was strength, her father had always told her, but patience, she also knew, could feel like chains when wielded against dignity. A cough sounded from the second row. A man in a blazer glanced quickly away, pretending to read his magazine. Across the aisle, a young woman in her 20s. Kayla Brooks shifted in her seat, her phone discreetly angled upward, the screen glowing red. Live. Victoria leaned closer, lowering her voice but sharpening the edge. "Why don't you avoid embarrassment and move to economy before this becomes unpleasant?" Amara met her eyes, calm, unwavering. "No." The refusal rang louder than the engines idling below. Victoria's lips curled into something between disdain and disbelief. "Then you leave me no choice." And before Amara could move, the crack split the cabin. The sound of palm against cheek, flesh against flesh, a slap. Passengers gasped. Someone dropped a carry-on. The air itself seemed to falter. Amara's head had turned slightly with the blow, her scarf shifting across her shoulder. Her cheek burned, but her spine remained unbent. Kayla's phone trembled in her hands as she whispered into the live stream. She just slapped that woman in first class. Amara's eyes watered not from pain, but from the sudden weight of humiliation, the echo of every moment in her past when she had been told, in words or in silence, that she did not belong. Her mind raced. Should she stand and leave, preserving peace but surrendering dignity? Should she reveal who she was? End this spectacle with a single phone call, or should she endure, knowing the cameras now captured truth clearer than any press release? Her heart pounded against her ribs. In her notebook, the words she had written before boarding now flashed in memory. Dignity. Victoria straightened her uniform, voice rising so the entire cabin could hear. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. There appears to be a mistake with this seat assignment. Gasps turned to murmurs. An elderly passenger in row 6 shook her head, whispering to her companion, "That's no mistake. That's cruelty." Amara touched her cheek, the warmth of the slap grounding her in the present. She refused to let her hands shake. She refused to let her voice quiver. When she finally spoke, her tone was almost gentle, yet it carried the clarity of truth. No mistake was made. I belong here. The engines outside whined as if echoing her resolve. The live stream counter ticked higher, thousands of viewers joining every minute. Victoria's eyes hardened. Not for long. She motioned toward the door, where 2 uniformed airport security officers had just stepped inside, confusion flickering across their faces as they took in the scene. The moment stretched, suspended in the charged silence of the cabin. Amara sat still, her thoughts a storm beneath calm waters. Do I endure? Do I fight? Do I reveal everything now? Her father's voice whispered in memory, "Power is patience, but patience must never be mistaken for surrender." Amara closed her notebook slowly, her fingertips pressing the leather cover as if sealing a vow. The story was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone watching, everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. And she would not bow. The sting of the slap still lingered on Amara Lewis's cheek, but she sat unmoving, her body a study in restraint. Her stillness was not weakness. It was a deliberate choice, the kind that burned with quiet power. Across from her, Victoria Hale smoothed her uniform as if nothing unusual had happened. The murmur of passengers rippled through the first-class cabin like a storm warning. Victoria adjusted her tone, masking cruelty with false professionalism. "Madam, I need to recheck your boarding pass." Amara's boarding pass was tucked neatly into the pocket of her leather notebook. She pulled it out slowly, deliberately, as though every movement carried the weight of history. She handed it forward without a word. Victoria held it between 2 fingers, her nose tightening as she studied it. "Seat 1A, she said aloud, pausing on the number as if it carried suspicion. Her voice dropped. "Are you certain this was purchased by you?" The cabin grew colder. A businessman in seat 2C raised his eyebrows, pretending to continue working on his laptop, but not typing a single word. A mother rocking her baby 2 rows behind stiffened, her eyes darting nervously between Amara and the flight attendant. Amara inhaled slowly. "Yes, by me." Her voice was calm, but inside she wrestled with the same ache that had haunted her for decades. This wasn't new. It had happened at hotel check-ins, at restaurants, at luxury boutiques where salespeople ignored her until she flashed a platinum card. The question was never really about the boarding pass. It was about who they believed belonged in a seat like this. Kayla Brooks shifted in her seat a row behind, her phone still angled discreetly, red light glowing. Thousands of viewers were already watching. She whispered to her live audience, "She just slapped this woman, and now she's questioning if she bought her seat. You're seeing this in real time." Victoria tilted the pass as if examining it for hidden flaws. People make mistakes. Sometimes documents get misused. She looked directly into Amara's eyes, a smirk ghosting her lips. "You understand what I'm saying, don't you?" Amara felt her chest tighten, but her face remained composed. She thought of her late father, who had taught her that every insult carried two weights, the one you accepted and the one you refused. He had told her to choose carefully which burden she would bear. She leaned forward slightly, her voice low but clear. "What I understand is that you're questioning me, not the paper in your hand." The words hung in the air, simple but undeniable. The older woman in row 6, Margaret Ellison, leaned toward her seatmate and whispered loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "It's disgraceful. I've flown for 50 years, and I've never seen a paying customer treated like this." Victoria's eyes flicked toward Margaret with irritation, but she didn't respond. Instead, she stepped closer to Amara, lowering her voice so only a few rows could hear. "Why are you making this difficult? If you just move quietly, we can avoid a scene." Amara's cheek still burned, not from the slap alone, but from the weight of every watching eye. Inside, doubt swirled. Should she endure this humiliation one more time? Would silence keep the peace and allow the flight to continue smoothly, or would silence make her complicit in her own erasure? Her heart thudded with the gravity of choice. The engines outside roared faintly as though urging her to decide. She thought of the boardroom battles she had fought in polished towers across the country. She remembered being the only black woman at the table, the one they underestimated until she spoke, until her words reshaped entire strategies. Every time she had chosen to stay silent, she had walked away regretting it. Every time she had spoken, even when her voice trembled, the ground had shifted. Her hand brushed against her notebook. Inside, her last written word stared back at her memory dignity. Amara spoke softly, but the cabin carried her words like an echo. "I am not moving." The businessman in 2C closed his laptop fully now, his curiosity overtaking pretense. Kayla Brooks murmured into her phone. She said, "No, she's not moving." Her live stream viewer count jumped again. Victoria's smile was thin and brittle. "Then you are making this difficult, and I don't appreciate being challenged." She tapped her earpiece, muttering into the small microphone. Her voice was clipped, efficient. "I need security at the front cabin immediately. Possible fraudulent passenger." The phrase was chosen carefully. Fraudulent passenger. 2 words designed to transform perception in an instant, to tilt sympathy toward suspicion. Amara's chest tightened further. She could feel the heat rising at the back of her neck, the tension between holding her ground and exploding. But she chose stillness again. Stillness was her weapon, her armor, her way of refusing to bend. Margaret Ellison sat up straighter in her seat. "This is outrageous," she said louder this time. "She showed you her ticket. She belongs here." Victoria turned toward Margaret, her voice icy. "Ma'am, please stay seated. This doesn't concern you, but it did concern everyone now." The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. Passengers were no longer passive observers. They were witnesses. And with Kayla's live stream glowing brighter, the whole world had begun to watch too. Amara's inner monologue roared louder than the engines. "Should I reveal myself now? Should I end this with a single phone call? Strip this woman of her illusion of power. But if I reveal it too soon, it will look like I fought her with wealth, not with truth." She slapped me because she believed I didn't belong, not because she knew who I was. The world needs to see that first. Her hands trembled beneath the table, hidden from view. She clenched them tightly, grounding herself. Security appeared at the cabin entrance. Two men in dark uniforms stepped inside, scanning the scene with uncertainty. Passengers' whispers swelled into a low chorus. Kayla zoomed in, whispering to her viewers. Security just walked in. This is about to escalate, Victoria gestured triumphantly. Gentlemen, please escort this woman out of seat 1A. We have reason to believe she does not belong here. The cabin froze. Amara's heartbeat slowed, her fear crystallizing into clarity. She remembered her father's words once more. Power is patience, but patience must never become surrender. She raised her chin, the mark of the slap still faintly red, and met the eyes of the approaching officers. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but undeniable. My name is Amara Lewis. I am in the right seat, and I will not be leaving. The officers hesitated, caught between the authority of the flight attendant and the unshakable calm of the woman before them. In that hesitation, the truth of the moment revealed itself. Power did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered and waited for the world to catch up. The live stream counter on Kayla's phone surged again, tens of thousands more pouring into the feed. The scene had become more than a dispute over a seat. It had become a test of dignity played out before countless witnesses. Amara pressed her hand lightly against her notebook once more. The word inside pulsed through her memory like a drumbeat. Dignity. And she knew, with a certainty that quieted the storm within her, that she would not bow. Not here. Not now. Not ever again. The tension in the first-class cabin hung thick in the air, heavier than the recycled oxygen that filled the aircraft. Amara Lewis sat steady in seat 1A, her posture straight, her scarf gently resting on her shoulder, her cheek still warm from the slap. Across from her, Victoria Hale stood with her arms crossed, her authority radiating through the sharp angles of her uniform. Two security officers hovered at the entrance of the cabin, uncertain, waiting for direction. It should have been a simple flight, a journey like any other. But now the cabin had transformed into an invisible courtroom, every passenger seated like jurors, every word weighted with judgment. Kayla Brooks adjusted her phone, her live stream still glowing red. She whispered into the device, her voice trembling with adrenaline. If you're just joining, this flight attendant slapped the woman in seat 1A. She's refusing to move. Security is here. This is happening live. The comments flooded in, emojis and outrage scrolling faster than Kayla could read. Margaret Ellison leaned forward in row 6, her silver hair catching the cabin light. Her eyes, sharp with decades of wisdom, bore into Victoria. This isn't right, she said, loud enough for those around her to hear. You've crossed a line. A businessman in 2C shook his head. Maybe she should just move, he muttered under his breath, though loud enough to carry. We all want to take off on time. Why cause a scene? Margaret turned toward him, her voice tinged with disbelief. Cause a scene she was assaulted for sitting in the seat she paid for. The man shifted uncomfortably, pulling his laptop closer, retreating into the shield of his screen. The cabin was dividing itself along lines of conscience. Some passengers leaned forward, sympathetic, whispering support. Others turned away, avoiding eye contact, desperate to preserve the illusion of normalcy. And then there were those who sided with Victoria, muttering about order and rules, the need to trust authority even when authority bruised. Amara sat in silence, listening, absorbing the shifting tides. Inside, her mind was a storm. She could hear her own thoughts battling like thunder. Should I reveal who I am now? End this farce with one sentence, one call. But if I do, it will look like I used wealth, not truth. The world needs to see the disrespect before it sees the power. Her hand brushed the edge of her notebook. The leather was worn smooth by years of use, the word written inside still pulsing in her memory. Dignity. It had become more than a word. It was a vow, a compass, a demand. Victoria broke the silence, her voice firm, aimed as much at the watching passengers as at Amara herself. Ladies and gentlemen, I assure you this is for everyone's safety. When someone occupies a seat they shouldn't, we have to act quickly. Procedures exist for a reason. Kayla's camera caught the smirk hidden beneath her polished expression. The live stream comments exploded in outrage. Procedures! That's assault. She literally slapped her. This is racism in plain view. Margaret raised her voice again, refusing to be silenced. You can dress it up in procedures, but everyone here saw what happened. That woman did nothing wrong. The young mother 2 rows behind clutched her baby tighter, whispering softly, "Don't get involved," her husband cautioned, but her eyes stayed on Amara, filled with empathy she could not voice aloud. One of the security officers cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said to Victoria, "she does have a boarding pass. Maybe we should—" Victoria snapped, her composure cracking. "Do not question me in front of passengers. Escort her out. Now." The officer hesitated again, his eyes darting toward Amara. Something in her stillness unsettled him. She did not look like someone afraid of being caught. She looked like someone who carried the patience of 1,000 trials. Kayla whispered into her phone. Security doesn't look convinced. This is incredible. People, keep sharing this. The viewer count soared past 500,000. Amara's chest rose and fell with measured breaths. She could feel the weight of eyes upon her, the silent prayers of those who wanted her to endure, the cynical dismissal of those who wanted her to vanish, the quiet curiosity of those who just wanted entertainment. She was more than herself now. She was a mirror, reflecting back every prejudice, every doubt, every hope. Her thoughts turned inward. She remembered being a child, sitting on a bus next to her mother, asked to move so that someone else could sit more comfortably. She remembered her mother's hand tightening on hers, the whispered words, "We are not less than anyone." That memory lived in her blood, in her bones, in her heart. It lived now in this seat, 1A, on this flight. Victoria took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for Amara. "Why are you doing this? You could just move. Avoid all this embarrassment. No one will remember." Amara's lips curved into the faintest smile, not of amusement, but of recognition. She had heard this before. She had been told to shrink, to step aside, to surrender dignity in exchange for convenience. But she had learned that people always remembered, especially the ones who demanded her silence. She answered softly, her words barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of centuries. "I will not move, and people will remember." Victoria's eyes narrowed, but there was a flicker of unease now, a shadow in her confidence. She straightened, gesturing again to the officers. "Remove her." The cabin held its breath. The officers stepped closer, but their movements were uncertain, hesitant. The passengers shifted in their seats, some pulling out phones to record, others staring rigidly ahead, unwilling to involve themselves. Kayla's phone shook in her hand as she narrated, "They're about to drag her out. This is happening." Margaret Ellison rose from her seat in row 6, her voice steady, commanding in its own quiet way. "If you touch her, you will have to touch me too. And every passenger here will see it. Every camera will see it." Her stand sent ripples through the cabin. A younger man in row 4 stood as well, his voice trembling but resolute. "She belongs here." We all saw it. The businessman in 2C muttered again. This is getting out of hand, but his voice sounded less certain now. Amara felt a rush of emotion surge within her. For so long, she had borne the weight alone. Now, others were beginning to share it, to recognize it, to resist with her. Her doubt softened, replaced by a fierce clarity. She would not be removed. Not because of who she was privately, but because of what she represented publicly. Victoria's composure faltered. She could sense the tide turning, but she pressed harder, unwilling to lose control. You are obstructing a flight. You are jeopardizing everyone's safety. Amara's voice rose for the first time, steady and strong, filling the cabin. Safety is not the issue here. Dignity is... The words cut through the air like lightning. Passengers gasped. Kayla repeated them into her phone, her voice shaking. She said, "Dignity is the issue." The phrase raced across social media, stamped into the memory of thousands who watched live. Amara's heart beat steadily now. The storm inside her had found its center. Whatever came next, she knew she would not surrender. The cabin had divided itself, but in that division, a truth was emerging. Some believed in silence, some believed in order, some believed in power. But more and more were beginning to believe in her. And belief, once kindled, could not be extinguished. The two security officers stepped farther into the cabin, their polished shoes thudding lightly against the carpeted aisle. They exchanged uneasy glances, uncertain whether to follow Victoria Hale's command or pause to understand what was happening. The entire first-class cabin felt like a stage now, every passenger and audience member caught in the performance of authority and resistance. Victoria straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin as if she had already won. Her voice carried like steel wrapped in velvet. "Gentlemen, this passenger is refusing to comply. She is in a seat she should not be in. Remove her immediately." Her words were not simply an order, they were an indictment. They shaped the narrative before anyone else could. Fraudulent passenger, non-compliant, disruptive, labels designed to erase the truth. Amara Lewis felt her heart beat slow, each pulse deliberate. She had been here before, in boardrooms where her ideas were dismissed until a man repeated them, in negotiations where her presence was tolerated but not respected, in hotel lobbies where staff assumed she was the driver rather than the guest. Every time, the same attempt to diminish her, to strip her of belonging. Now it was happening here, thousands of feet above the ground, with the watching eyes of strangers and the silent lens of Kayla Brooks's phone. Victoria turned slightly, her voice rising louder, intended for the cabin to hear. "These people always try to push boundaries. They think rules don't apply to them." The phrase shattered the fragile balance. A collective intake of breath swept through the passengers. Margaret Ellison, seated in row 6, gasped audibly. The businessman in 2C lowered his gaze, uncomfortable at the naked prejudice spoken aloud. Kayla's live stream crackled with furious comments. Did she just say, "These people racist much? The whole world is watching"? Amara closed her eyes briefly. The words pierced her, not because they were new, but because they were ancient, echoes of a wound carried across generations. For a moment, her restraint threatened to break. She wanted to rise, to shout, to unleash the anger pressing against her ribs, but she held steady. Not yet. Her thoughts collided within her. Do I reveal myself now? Do I call David Lynn and end this with one instruction, one reminder of who truly owns this aircraft? But if I do, will the story lose its meaning? Will the world see a billionaire protecting her pride instead of a black woman protecting her dignity? She heard her father's voice again, low and steady, as if carried through memory. You must let the truth show itself before you show your power. Otherwise, they will say it was power, not truth. That won. Her hands trembled in her lap. hidden beneath the fold of her scarf. She clenched them until her knuckles ached, using the pain to ground herself. Victoria gestured impatiently toward the officers. "Do your job. Remove her." The taller officer cleared his throat, his voice uncertain. "Ma'am, she has a boarding pass that says 1A. Victoria snapped, her composure fracturing. "Do not contradict me. I am the lead flight attendant. My authority in the cabin is final." Her insistence was brittle, like glass about to crack. Margaret Ellison rose halfway from her seat, gripping the armrest for balance. Her voice, though aged, carried strength. "Everyone here saw her show her ticket. Everyone saw you strike her. If you lay one hand on that woman, you'll have to answer not only to us but to the entire world watching." Kayla's phone trembled in her hand. "500,000 people are live right now," she whispered to her audience. "This is going viral." The officers hesitated again, frozen between conflicting commands. The passengers shifted in their seats, some whispering prayers, others pulling out their phones to record. The cabin had become more than a dispute. It had become a battleground of conscience. Amara finally opened her eyes, her gaze steady, her voice quiet but resonant. "I am not leaving this seat. I paid for it. I belong here, and I will not move because of prejudice." Her words sliced through the noise, direct and undeniable. Victoria's face flushed. "You are obstructing a flight. You are endangering safety." Amara leaned forward slightly, her tone calm but unyielding. "Safety is not the issue here. Dignity is." The sentence rang through the cabin. Kayla repeated it into her phone, her voice hushed with awe. She just said it again. Dignity is the issue. The live stream counter spiked higher, comments pouring in faster than Kayla could keep up. The baby 2 rows back began to cry softly, the mother rocking her gently while her eyes remained locked on Amara. The businessman in 2C looked away, ashamed, as though seeing something he wished he could deny, but no longer could. Amara's inner storm raged, but her face remained composed. She thought of all the time she had endured in silence. She thought of the nights she had cried alone after being dismissed, degraded, denied. She thought of the women before her, the ones who had sat where they were told not to sit, who had walked where they were told not to walk, who had spoken when they were told to remain silent. She carried them all now in seat 1A. Margaret's voice rose again, stronger this time. "If you remove her, you will have to remove me too. And I promise you, this will not end quietly." Another passenger, a young man in row 4, stood as well. "She belongs here." We all saw it. The atmosphere shifted. The tide was turning. What had begun as isolation was becoming solidarity. Amara felt the shift inside her too. For the first time, she was not entirely alone in her stand. Others were risking comfort, risking silence, to support her. Victoria's voice grew shrill, cracking under the weight of resistance. "Sit down. All of you sit down. This is my cabin and I will not lose control." But control was already slipping through her fingers. Amara pressed her palm against her notebook once more. Inside, the single word she had written before boarding still glowed in memory. Dignity. It was more than a word now. It was a movement being born in real time, witnessed by thousands, soon millions. She breathed deeply, her voice soft but unbreakable. "You can strike me, you can call me names, you can summon officers, but you will not erase me. I am here, I belong here, and I will not bow." The officers looked at each other, uncertain, reluctant to touch her. Victoria's fury burned in silence, her authority unraveling. The cabin was no longer divided. It was shifting, tilting, awakening. The truth was too loud to ignore, and Amara knew in the marrow of her bones that the moment of revelation was drawing near. The hum of the engines seemed to fade beneath the heavy silence of the cabin. Passengers leaned forward, their eyes darting between Amara Lewis and Victoria Hale, between the woman in seat 1A who refused to move and the flight attendant whose authority was cracking with each passing second. The two security officers remained by the aisle, uncertain, caught in the gravity of the confrontation. Amara sat perfectly still, her scarf draped over one shoulder, her notebook resting in her lap. Her cheek still burned faintly from the slap, but her spirit burned hotter. Inside, her thoughts churned. She had been patient, had endured the humiliation long enough. Now the question pulsed in her veins. Was it time to reveal the truth? Kayla Brooks whispered into her phone, her live stream trembling with intensity. We're at almost 1 million viewers right now. Everyone's watching. She still hasn't moved. The flight attendant looks like she's losing control. Victoria's face was taut, her voice laced with brittle steel. This is your final chance. Leave seat 1A voluntarily or be escorted out. Amara exhaled slowly, then reached for her phone. The leather of her notebook brushed against her fingers as she slid the device from its pocket. She unlocked it with a practiced touch and scrolled through contacts until she reached the name she knew would end this theater. She pressed the call button. The ringing cut through the silence. 1, 2, 3 tones, and then a crisp voice answered. Madam Lewis, came the greeting, calm, formal, carrying the weight of deference. This is David Lynn. Gasps erupted in the cabin. Several passengers froze mid-breath, the recognition of that name cutting through confusion. David Lynn, chairman of Orion Holdings, the conglomerate that owned the airline they were sitting on. Victoria's face drained of color. Her lips parted slightly as if to protest, but no words came. Amara lifted her chin, speaking clearly so everyone could hear. David, I am on Flight 247, Seat 1A. A flight attendant has struck me, questioned the legitimacy of my ticket, and attempted to have me removed. I am invoking the dignity clause. The words rang through the air like a gavel striking wood. The passengers stared, wide-eyed. Kayla whispered into her phone, "Oh my God, she's calling the chairman of Orion Holdings. She just invoked something called the dignity clause. Are you hearing this? Her live stream viewer count spiked past 1.5 million. On the line." David Lynn's tone sharpened, decisive. Understood. Stay where you are. I will issue orders immediately. You have our full backing, Madam Lewis. The line clicked, silence returning, but it was a silence transformed. Authority had shifted. The ground beneath Victoria's feet was no longer steady. Amara lowered the phone onto her lap, her gaze never wavering. You asked if I belonged here. I do, more than you realize. Margaret Ellison's eyes sparkled with vindication. She whispered to her seatmate, I knew she wasn't just anyone. The security officers stepped back slightly, no longer moving toward Amara. One of them adjusted his collar nervously, his eyes fixed on Victoria, waiting for direction that would not come. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her hands twitched at her sides, her polished facade crumbling. What clause, she stammered, her voice stripped of certainty. Amara answered calmly, her voice carrying to every corner of the cabin. Orion Holdings has a provision known as the Dignity Clause. It grants shareholders the right to intervene in real time when violations of dignity occur aboard company property. I hold that right, and I will use it. Kayla repeated the words into her phone. The Dignity Clause. She said it. This is history. This is bigger than just one flight. The cabin erupted in murmurs. Some passengers clapped softly, others whispered in astonishment. The businessman in 2C closed his laptop fully now, his expression transformed from irritation to awe. Amara pressed her hand lightly against her notebook once more, steadying herself. Inside, her inner voice trembled with both relief and heaviness. She had revealed her power, but she knew this moment was not just about authority. It was about truth. It was about a slap that represented more than one woman's humiliation. It was about centuries of being told to move, to shrink, to disappear. She looked at Victoria, whose eyes darted around the cabin, searching for allies that no longer existed. "Your authority ends where dignity begins," Amara said softly. "And dignity has been violated." The words struck with the force of judgment. Kayla's live-stream comments flashed furiously. "This is incredible. She's a shareholder." "No, she's the shareholder." Power and dignity on display. The baby 2 rows back had stopped crying, as if even infants could sense the shift in the air. The hum of the engines returned to prominence, a steady reminder that the flight had not yet left the ground, but history had already taken off. Margaret clapped her hands together once, a sound that broke the spell of silence. A few passengers joined her, hesitant at first, then stronger, applause spreading like fire. Amara's chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with emotion she could barely contain. She thought again of her father, of the nights she had spent preparing for moments like this, of the countless times she had chosen patience over confrontation. Now she had chosen confrontation, and the world was watching. Victoria's composure collapsed entirely. Her voice cracked as she tried to regain control. "You can't. You can't just override procedure." But even as she spoke, the intercom crackled. A voice filled the cabin, low and formal. "This is Orion Operations Control. Effective immediately. Authority in this cabin is transferred under the Dignity Clause. All staff are to comply with directives from Madam Amara Lewis. The lead attendant is suspended pending investigation." The words were final, indisputable. Victoria's face drained completely, her hands shaking. She removed her badge mechanically as though compelled by forces greater than herself. The cabin broke into applause again, louder this time. Some passengers cheered, others wiped away tears. Kayla's phone shook in her hand as she whispered to her viewers, "You're seeing history. She just took control of the flight. The whole system is changing before our eyes." Amara sat back in her seat, exhaling slowly. Relief coursed through her, but beneath it lingered the weight of responsibility. She had revealed her power, but with it came expectation. The world would demand more than words. It would demand change. She turned her gaze out the window, the tarmac stretching endlessly under the late afternoon sun. Her reflection stared back at her, composed but weary. This was only the beginning. The cabin had fallen into a charged silence, the kind that comes when everyone realizes history has shifted in the space of a heartbeat. Victoria Hale stood frozen, her badge trembling in her hand as if the weight of it had suddenly become unbearable. The 2 security officers who had come to remove Amara Lewis stepped back, their expressions uncertain, caught between disbelief and awe. Amara sat still in seat 1A, her phone resting on her lap, her scarf draped elegantly across her shoulder. Her calmness radiated through the cabin like a steady current, quiet but undeniable. She was no longer just a passenger. She was the embodiment of authority, and more than that, of resistance that had finally found its voice. Kayla Brooks whispered into her phone, her live stream counter passing 2 million. "Everyone watching, you just saw it. The operations control confirmed. Amara Lewis has authority over this cabin under something called the Dignity Clause. The flight attendant's been suspended right here, mid-flight. This is unbelievable." Passengers leaned toward one another, whispering in disbelief. Margaret Ellison, eyes blazing with vindication, shook her head slowly. "I knew she wasn't just anyone," she murmured to her seatmate. Victoria finally found her voice, though it cracked with strain. "This This is not how procedure works. You can't just strip me of my authority mid-flight. There are protocols." Amara turned her gaze toward her, unshaken. "Your authority ended the moment you chose humiliation over respect. Procedures cannot protect abuse." The words sliced through the air. Victoria's face burned red, her jaw tight. She looked to the officers for support, but they only shook their heads slightly, unwilling to defy the message that had come directly from Orion Operations Control. The intercom buzzed again, this time with a new voice. Calm, authoritative, unmistakable. "This is Captain Ethan Ward. I have been informed of the activation of the Dignity Clause. From this point forward, all crew members are expected to comply with the directives of Madame Amara Lewis. This order is binding and non-negotiable." The cabin erupted in murmurs again. For many, the announcement was surreal. Never before had passengers seen power shift so dramatically, so publicly, within the walls of an aircraft. Kayla's live stream audience surged once more, commenters flooding the feed with words like justice and historic. Victoria's shoulders sagged as if the strength had been pulled from her body. She lowered her badge into the hands of one of the security officers, her eyes darting desperately around the cabin. "This isn't fair," she whispered, her voice more fragile now. Amara regarded her with a calm sadness. "Fairness ended when you raised your hand against me. Dignity begins here." Margaret's applause started softly, just 2 claps echoing through the hush. Then others joined, tentative at first, then stronger, until the sound filled the cabin. Applause rolled like a wave, washing over the broken authority of the lead attendant. Amara inhaled slowly, her chest heavy. She knew this was bigger than her. It was bigger than a seat or a slap. It was about every traveler who had been treated as less, every person who had been told they didn't belong. This moment was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had endured in silence. Her phone buzzed again. David Lynn's voice was calm but firm. "Madam Lewis, Operations Control has rerouted communications. You have full discretionary authority under the clause. Any directives you issue will be enforced immediately." "Thank you," Amara replied softly, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. She placed her phone down and turned toward the cabin. Her voice was steady, warm, but resolute. "I will not let this incident be brushed aside. From this moment, dignity is the law on this plane. Everyone here deserves respect, without exception." Kayla repeated the words into her phone. She just said it. Dignity is the law on this plane. This is extraordinary. The officers stepped aside, no longer part of a conflict, but part of a resolution. Victoria stood with her head bowed, her uniform neat, but her presence diminished. The authority she had wielded like a weapon had been stripped, leaving only the stark truth of her actions. Amara turned toward a young flight attendant who had remained silent during the confrontation. His nameplate read, Ortiz. She spoke with calm assurance. "Mr. Ortiz, please assume service for this cabin." Daniel Ortiz blinked, startled to hear his name. He glanced nervously at Victoria, then back at Amara. Finally, he nodded. "Yes, madam." The transition was seamless. Authority passed from one set of hands to another, not by violence, but by principle. Daniel moved with quiet professionalism, retrieving water and a clean towel. He placed them gently on Amara's table, his voice respectful. "Is there anything else I can bring you?" Amara gave a small shake of her head, her eyes softening for the first time. "No, thank you." She pressed the towel lightly against her cheek, feeling the coolness soothe the sting of the earlier slap. It was a symbolic act as much as a physical one, a cleansing of the wound, a mark of survival. Around her, The passengers watched in reverent silence. Some whispered about her strength, others about the dignity clause, others still about the audacity of a system that had allowed such cruelty to happen in the first place. Inside, Amara wrestled with her emotions. Relief mingled with anger, pride mixed with sorrow. She had revealed her power, but she wished she had never needed to. She wished dignity had been granted freely rather than wrested through confrontation. Her inner voice whispered again, reminding her of her father's lessons. Power is patience, but when patience is abused, power must speak. Margaret Ellison stood briefly, turning toward the rest of the cabin. We have witnessed something remarkable today. Remember it. Remember that dignity is not a privilege, but a right. Applause followed once more, stronger than before. Victoria sank into an empty jump seat at the back of the cabin, her face pale, her eyes hollow. The weight of her choices pressed visibly upon her. But for the rest of the passengers, the story had already moved beyond her. Kayla's live stream reached 3 million viewers. The comments were relentless. This is history. Amara Lewis for president. Dignity clause needs to be everywhere. I'm crying just watching this. Amara sat back against her seat, closing her eyes briefly. For the first time since the slap, she allowed herself a moment of stillness, not of restraint, but of peace. She knew this was only the beginning. The world outside this cabin would demand answers. Change would not come easily, but here, in this moment, she had planted a seed. Dignity had been declared law in the skies, and nothing would ever be the same again. The cabin that had moments before been a battlefield of words and humiliation now shifted into something else entirely. The tension was not gone, but it was no longer sharp and hostile. It had softened into an atmosphere of reverence and curiosity. The kind of silence people hold when they realize they have witnessed something that will be remembered long after the flight ends. Amara Lewis remained in seat 1A, her presence calm and unshaken, though her cheek still carried the faint imprint of what had happened. She pressed the cool towel Daniel Ortiz had given her lightly against her skin. It soothed the sting, but it did not erase it. She knew it never would. Daniel moved carefully through the aisle, his voice gentle as he offered water and small comforts to the surrounding passengers. Would anyone care for refreshments while we finalized departure procedures? His tone carried respect, not just for Amara, but for every passenger in the cabin. He was setting a new rhythm, one built not on fear, but on service. Margaret Ellison smiled at him warmly. Thank you, young man. You're doing the right thing. He nodded, a flicker of relief passing over his face. He, too, had been caught in the storm, silent under Victoria's command. Now he was free to serve with dignity, and he embraced it fully. Amara observed this with quiet satisfaction. For the first time since boarding, she allowed herself to breathe a little deeper. She had not sought this confrontation, but if it had to happen, she was grateful to see that order could be restored, not by authority alone, but by humanity. Kayla Brooks whispered into her phone, still streaming, her voice now steadier. The mood here has completely changed. Daniel Ortiz, a new attendant, is handling things now. People are calmer, but you can still feel the weight of what just happened. No one will forget this. The live stream comments flew by, some praising Amara's strength, others reflecting on their own experiences of discrimination. A chorus of voices united across the digital ether, echoing the moment in the cabin. Amara leaned her head back against the seat, her eyes drifting closed for just a second. She saw flashes of her past, moments stitched into her memory like scars. She was a girl on a crowded bus, told to move so that others could sit more comfortably. She was a young professional, dismissed in meetings until her ideas were repeated by someone else. She was a woman in luxury spaces, treated as an intruder rather than a guest. Those memories pressed against her heart, heavier now because they had been repeated once more, here in this cabin. But for the first time, she had not endured alone. For the first time, witnesses had risen with her, not against her. When she opened her eyes again, Margaret was watching her with kind eyes. The older woman spoke softly, but with conviction. "You did something today that many of us wished we had done in our own time. You stood firm." Amara nodded faintly. Her voice carried both gratitude and sorrow. "I only wish I had never needed to." Margaret's lips curved into a sad smile. Change has always come because someone refused to move when told to. You're part of a long line of people who have carried that burden. Amara's chest tightened at those words. They were true, painfully true. She felt both the honor and the exhaustion of it. She was not just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every woman, every man, every child who had been told they did not belong. Daniel returned with a fresh glass of sparkling water, placing it gently on Amara's table. His voice was low, almost reverent. "If there's anything more I can do, please let me know." Amara met his eyes. "You've already done it. Thank you for stepping in." He gave a small nod and stepped back, his respect clear in his posture. The passengers settled into their seats, some opening books, others staring out windows. But the air was different now. They were not the same group of strangers who had boarded this plane. They had become unwilling participants in a drama that had revealed truths about dignity, prejudice, and courage, and they would carry it with them long after landing. Kayla finally ended her live stream, lowering her phone with trembling hands. She exhaled, whispering, "That was the most powerful thing I've ever seen." She sat back, staring at Amara as though seeing her not just as a passenger, but as a figure of history. Victoria Hale remained seated at the back of the cabin, stripped of authority, her eyes hollow. Her silence was not peace, it was defeat. She had lost not just control of the cabin, but the illusion that her cruelty could go unchallenged. Amara sipped her water, letting the coolness wash over her. Her hands steadied. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft but carried to those nearest. Order has been restored, but restoration without accountability is only a pause. The real change will come after this flight. The words lingered like a promise, or perhaps a warning. Margaret closed her eyes briefly, whispering a prayer under her breath. Daniel continued to serve, his movements quiet and efficient. Kayla replayed the footage on her phone, shaking her head in disbelief at what she had just captured. For Amara, the calm of the cabin was both comforting and haunting. It was the eye of the storm, a moment of stillness before the next wave. She knew that beyond this aircraft, there were boardrooms, press conferences, and countless voices waiting to demand answers. She knew the slap would not be the end of the story, but the beginning of something larger. She pressed her hand gently against her notebook once more, grounding herself in its leather cover. Inside, the word dignity waited for her like a compass. She knew she would return to it again and again until the world finally understood. For now, order had been restored. Passengers leaned back, exhaled, and reclaimed the illusion of normal travel. But beneath the hum of the engines, something profound had shifted. Amara gazed out the window at the expanse of sky beyond the glass. The clouds were endless, the horizon infinite. For the first time since the confrontation began, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility of change taking flight beyond this cabin. She whispered to herself, too softly for anyone else to hear. Let this not just be a moment. Let it become a movement. And as the engines roared, preparing to lift the plane from the ground, she knew that no matter what awaited them at their destination, the journey had already transformed them all. The aircraft had finally begun to taxi, but the cabin still carried the weight of what had just unfolded. Though the engines rumbled with familiar power, the passengers were not lulled into the usual rhythm of departure. Their minds remained tethered to the confrontation, their eyes still flicking toward Amara Lewis, who sat in seat 1A with unshakable composure. Amara felt the shift in the air. Order had been restored, yes, but she knew silence had a way of burying truth if no record was kept. Too many times she had seen incidents dismissed as misunderstandings, their sharp edges blunted until accountability vanished. Not this time. She lifted her phone and pressed the intercom button at her seat, her voice carrying through the cabin. Captain Ward, this is Amara Lewis. Before this flight continues, I am formally requesting documentation of the events that occurred, every witness statement, every recording. I want the truth preserved, not lost in excuses. There was a pause. Then the captain's voice responded, steady and formal. Acknowledged. Madam Lewis, documentation protocols will begin immediately. A ripple of surprise moved through the cabin. Passengers shifted in their seats, glancing at one another. Some nodded in approval. Others simply watched with fascination as history unfolded before their eyes. Kayla Brooks whispered to herself as she restarted her live stream. She's demanding documentation. She's making them record everything. This isn't just about this flight. It's about making sure it never happens again. Amara turned in her seat, her eyes scanning the cabin. Her voice, though soft, carried the strength of conviction. Each of you witnessed what happened. Each of you holds a piece of the truth. I ask you, do not let this be erased. Speak. Record. Stand with dignity, not silence. Margaret Ellison was the first to respond. She rose slowly, her hand steady on the armrest, her voice filled with a quiet fire. I will make a statement. I saw you struck. I heard you questioned. And I will not let anyone twist what I saw into something else. Her words broke the dam. Other passengers began to speak, one after another. The young mother rocked her baby as she lifted her voice. I saw it too. She had her boarding pass. She did nothing wrong. The businessman in 2C, who had once urged silence, cleared his throat awkwardly before admitting, I witnessed it as well. I didn't speak up fast enough. But I will now. Kayla raised her phone higher, capturing every voice, every testimony. This is turning into a courtroom in the sky, she murmured to her audience of millions. Daniel Ortiz retrieved a stack of incident forms from the galley, distributing them row by row. His voice carried respect. Please write what you saw. Be clear. Be honest. This will be submitted directly to Orion Operations. Pen scratched against paper. The quiet hum of testimony filled the air, a symphony of truth refusing to be silenced. Amara sat still, her heart heavy yet proud. For years she had carried the burden of being disbelieved, of knowing that prejudice often won when it was just her word against another's. Today, she was not alone. She was surrounded by witnesses who had found their voices, who had chosen courage over silence. Inside, her thoughts were conflicted. She felt vindication, yes, but also sorrow. Why must the simple act of sitting in a seat ignite such upheaval? Why must dignity always be defended as if it were contraband? The questions pressed against her chest like stones. Victoria Hale remained at the back of the cabin, silent, her face pale. She knew the tide had turned against her, but she still clung to fragments of defiance. Her eyes darted toward the forms being filled, her lips trembling as if to speak, but she said nothing. Margaret finished her statement and handed it to Daniel. She then turned to Amara, her voice warm. "You've turned humiliation into testimony. That is power. They cannot erase what is written." Amara nodded faintly, though her inner voice whispered doubt. Power without change is still fragile. Would these statements lead to reform, or would they be filed away? Forgotten once the headlines faded, Kayla ended her latest recording, whispering, 3.5 million views already. This is bigger than any news network could cover live. The world is watching. Amara heard her words and let them sink in. Perhaps this time would be different. Perhaps the weight of millions of eyes would prevent silence from swallowing truth. Captain Ethan Ward's voice returned over the intercom. "Thank you to all passengers providing testimony. All documents will be secured and submitted under the authority of Orion Holdings. I commend you all for your cooperation." The applause that followed was quieter this time, less celebratory and more solemn. It was not joy they felt, but responsibility. Amara pressed her hand against her notebook again, grounding herself in its familiar leather cover. Inside, the single word still pulsed in memory. Dignity. It was not yet achieved, not fully, but today it had been defended, and that defense would be remembered. She turned toward Kayla, meeting the young woman's eyes. "You've been recording all of this." Why? Kayla swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "Because I've seen things like this before, and no one believed me when I told them. This time, I wanted proof. And now, the whole world has seen it." Amara's eyes softened. "You've done more than record. You've given truth a voice it can no longer be denied." Kayla blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. "I didn't know what I was doing when I started. I just knew it felt wrong. And now," she trailed off, glancing at her phone, at the flood of comments that poured in every second. Amara smiled faintly, the first true smile since boarding. Sometimes the smallest act becomes the spark for something greater. The engines roared louder as the plane reached the runway, the vibrations rising through the cabin. Passengers braced for takeoff, but their thoughts were far from ordinary travel. They carried the weight of testimony, of dignity reclaimed, of history unfolding around them. As the aircraft lifted from the ground, Amara gazed out the window at the endless sky. She whispered to herself, too softly for anyone else to hear, "Let the record stand. Let the truth fly higher than lies." And with that, the plane soared into the clouds, carrying not just travelers, but witnesses, each one now part of a story that would not be silenced. The engines steadied as the aircraft reached cruising altitude, the soft chime signaling that passengers could unbuckle their belts. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, but the energy in first class was anything but calm. The echoes of testimony still lingered in the air. Every word spoken by witnesses had reshaped the flight from a routine journey into a tribunal carried thousands of feet above the earth. Amara Lewis remained in seat 1A, her notebook closed now, but resting firmly on the table before her. She stared at it in silence, letting the word written inside steady her thoughts. Dignity. She had turned the cabin into a place of testimony, but she knew testimony alone was not enough. There had to be accountability. Daniel Ortiz, now the lead attendant by circumstance, moved gracefully through the cabin, offering quiet service. Yet even he knew the usual rhythms of a flight had been permanently disrupted. He approached Amara cautiously. "Is there anything else you need?" Madame Amara's gaze softened. "Yes, I need Captain Ward to come here. It is time we speak directly." Daniel's eyes widened slightly, then he nodded, disappearing toward the cockpit. Passengers whispered at the request. Some leaned forward with curiosity, others with unease. This was no longer just a confrontation with a flight attendant. It was a direct summons to authority at the highest level within the cabin. Minutes later, Captain Ethan Ward emerged. His uniform was crisp, his posture practiced, but his eyes betrayed hesitation. He walked the aisle slowly, aware that every gaze followed him. When he stopped before seat 1A, he removed his cap and held it at his side. "Madam Lewis," he began, his voice measured but strained. "I was informed of the situation. Operations Control has briefed me. I understand this has been unusual." Amara's eyes held his steadily. "Unusual is a gentle word for what transpired. Captain, a member of your crew struck me. Another attempted to remove me under false pretenses. This entire cabin has borne witness." The murmurs of passengers rose, confirming her words. Kayla Brooks, livestream resumed, whispered into her phone, "The captain is here." She's confronting him directly. Captain Ward inhaled deeply. "You have my apologies for what occurred. Once we land, a full report will be filed, and Orion Holdings will conduct an investigation." Amara shook her head slowly, her voice calm but firm. "No, Captain, that is not enough. Accountability does not wait for landing. It begins here, in this cabin, while the wound is still fresh." He hesitated, glancing at the passengers, then back at her. "What would you have me do?" Amara straightened, her presence filling the space. "Acknowledge what happened publicly, here and now, in front of your passengers. Confirm that the testimony we gathered is valid and will be preserved. And remove from duty not only Victoria Hale, but anyone who enabled her actions through silence." Gasps spread through the cabin. Margaret Ellison leaned forward, nodding in approval. The young man from row 4 whispered, "Yes, she's right." The captain's jaw tightened. He was a man accustomed to control, yet here he was being asked to yield authority to truth. He struggled with the weight of it. Victoria, still seated at the back, spoke sharply. "You can't take her side over your own crew. This will destroy morale. You'll regret it." The captain turned his gaze toward her, his expression hardening. For the first time, he addressed her not as a colleague, but as a liability. "Ms. Hale, your actions have compromised the integrity of this flight. You struck a passenger. You misrepresented her ticket. You attempted to use authority as a weapon. There is nothing left to defend." The words landed with finality. Passengers exhaled, some nodding, others murmuring agreement. Kayla whispered into her phone, "He just said it." The captain admitted everything. Amara leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but unyielding. "Now confirm it to everyone here. Captain, speak it plainly, so that dignity is not only defended, but declared." Captain Ward's shoulders squared. He raised his voice so that it carried through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I confirm that a member of my crew struck Madam Amara Lewis, questioned her rightful seat, and attempted to remove her without cause. This conduct is unacceptable and in violation of Orion Holdings policy. Effective immediately. Ms. Hale is removed from duty. Documentation of witness testimony will be forwarded directly to Operations Control. I apologize to Madam Lewis and to all of you for what occurred under my command." Applause broke out across the cabin, spontaneous and powerful. Margaret clapped vigorously, her face lit with vindication. The young mother cradled her baby closer, whispering, "Thank God." Even the reluctant businessman in 2C joined the applause, though his face carried shame for his earlier silence. Kayla's voice trembled as she spoke into her phone. "You all heard it. The captain just admitted everything, live, in front of everyone. This is history." Amara felt a wave of emotion crash through her chest. For the first time since the slap, accountability had been spoken aloud. It did not erase the wound, but it honored it. It acknowledged her humanity in a way silence never could. Yet, inside, another storm brewed. She thought of how many times such acknowledgments had been denied to others. How many slaps, insults, humiliations had vanished into silence because no one had dared demand accountability mid-flight. She felt both pride and sorrow, knowing this moment was rare, but it should never have been rare at all. Her inner voice whispered, "You've forced truth into the open, but now you must ensure it is not forgotten." She turned back to the captain. "Thank you for your words, but words without action are only air. I will require a written acknowledgement before landing. Typed, signed, and preserved in Orion Holdings records." He blinked, startled, then nodded slowly. "It will be done." The authority in her request left no room for debate. The captain returned to the cockpit, the weight of his promise following him. Daniel Ortiz approached Amara again, his expression one of quiet admiration. "You changed the air in this cabin. I've served flights for years, but I've never seen truth spoken like this." Amara gave him a faint smile, though her eyes remained somber. Truth should never be extraordinary. Daniel, it should be ordinary. Passengers settled again, but their whispers carried the echo of what had been said. The cabin was no longer just a group of strangers traveling together. It had become a chorus of witnesses bound by shared accountability. Kayla ended her live stream briefly, her hands shaking as she lowered her phone. She whispered to Amara, "Do you realize what you've just done? The whole world is watching, and you made them listen." Amara looked down at her notebook, brushing her fingers against the leather cover. She whispered back, "The world has listened before and forgotten. This time, it cannot forget." She gazed out the window at the endless expanse of sky, her reflection staring back at her. The accountability had begun, but the battle was far from over. She knew this flight would land into a storm of media, boardrooms, and demands for reform, and she would meet it all with the same resolve she had shown here. For now, though, she allowed herself a moment of stillness. Not victory, but vindication. The kind that whispered of change yet to come. The aircraft cruised steadily now, the hum of engines blending with the softened conversations of passengers. But the first-class cabin was no longer ordinary. It had become something closer to a council chamber, a place where history was unfolding in real time. Amara Lewis sat upright in seat 1A, her notebook closed but never far from reach. The sting on her cheek had dulled, yet the echo of the slap still lingered deep inside her. It was not the pain that endured, but the meaning. That single strike had awakened a reckoning not just for her, but for an entire system that had long survived on silence. Captain Ethan Ward had returned to the cockpit, but his words remained heavy in the air, an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, an apology broadcast to every passenger. For Amara, it was a beginning, but only that. True change required more than apology. It required reform. Daniel Ortiz approached with quiet respect. "Madam Lewis," he said, his voice steady but humble. "The passengers keep talking about what happened. They're asking, will this change anything, or will it be another story that fades once the flight is over?" Amara regarded him thoughtfully. That is the right question. Too many times the world has seen moments like this become spectacle, then disappear. This one must not. Kayla Brooks, her phone live again, whispered to her viewers, "She's about to speak. Everyone keep listening." The counter ticked upward, thousands rejoining instantly. Amara raised her voice just enough to reach the entire cabin. "You all have witnessed what happened here. You have spoken your testimonies. The captain has acknowledged the truth. But now we must ask what comes next. If we leave this moment only as memory, then we have failed. If we turn it into change, then we honor it. The cabin stilled, passengers leaning forward. Even the businessman in 2C, who had kept his silence for so long, now looked at her with quiet respect. Amara continued, her voice calm but resonant. Discrimination thrives because it is hidden. It survives because those who witness it remain quiet, because those who suffer it are told to endure, and because institutions prefer convenience over conscience. Today, we have broken that silence, but we must ensure it cannot rebuild itself tomorrow. Margaret Ellison lifted her chin proudly. Then tell us how. What do we do? Amara's hand rested on her notebook. We build reforms. Today, mid-flight, I am calling for the expansion of the Dignity Clause into what I will name the Dignity Protocol. It will mandate that all flights under Orion Holdings, and eventually beyond, adopt 3 requirements. First, every incident involving dignity violations must be documented in real time with passenger testimony preserved. Second, accountability must occur immediately, not after landing. Third, systemic reviews must follow every violation to identify patterns and eliminate those who abuse authority. Gasps and murmurs filled the cabin. Kayla repeated the words into her phone, her voice trembling. The Dignity Protocol. She's creating it right now. The young man from row 4 raised his hand slightly, his voice unsteady but sincere. Do you think other airlines will follow, or will they resist? Amara met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. They will resist at first. Institutions always do. But resistance bends when truth is undeniable, and today, truth is being streamed to millions. They cannot bury it. They cannot silence it. They cannot deny it. Applause rose, steady and strong. Some passengers wiped tears from their eyes, realizing they were part of something far larger than a single flight. Daniel Ortiz stood taller now, pride flickering across his face. I would be proud to serve under such a protocol, to know that dignity is not just expected, but enforced. Margaret's eyes shone as she nodded. And passengers will know they are safe, that their humanity matters. Even Kayla lowered her phone for a moment, her voice breaking as she whispered to Amara, You're giving people hope. Real hope. Amara's heart swelled, though she kept her expression composed. Inside, she wrestled with exhaustion and determination. She had not asked for this moment, yet it had found her, and she could not let it slip away. Her father's voice echoed again in memory. If change is demanded of you, do not run from it. Stand and let it take root. She turned her gaze toward Victoria Hale at the back of the cabin. The former lead attendant sat pale and silent, her hands twisted together, her eyes dark with regret and fury. Amara addressed her without malice but with clarity. Ms. Hale, you may think this moment is about you. It is not. You are a symptom of a system that empowered you to act this way and expected silence to protect you. That system ends today. Victoria looked away, her lips pressed tightly, but her silence admitted more than her words could. Amara faced the passengers again. Each of you here has become a witness not only to an injustice, but to the birth of change. When you leave this plane, do not leave the truth behind. Carry it with you, speak it, demand it, and know that dignity is not a gift to be granted. It is a right to be defended. The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the cabin like waves against stone. Kayla lifted her phone again, tears streaking her cheeks. The Dignity Protocol, she whispered to the world. It's happening here, right now. Remember this moment. For Amara. The applause was both comfort and weight. Comfort that she was not alone. weight that she now carried the expectations of millions. She pressed her hand gently to her notebook, feeling the leather beneath her palm. She whispered to herself, "Let it hold." The engines roared softly, steadying the flight. The sky stretched endlessly outside the windows, a reminder of how small they were, and yet how much could change in the space of a single cabin. Margaret leaned over, her voice quiet, but filled with pride. "You've started something that will outlive this flight." Amara smiled faintly. Then it was worth enduring. Her cheek still tingled with the memory of the slap, but now it carried a different meaning. It was no longer only a wound. It was a spark, and from that spark, she was determined to light a fire of reform that no one could extinguish. The cabin quieted again as passengers returned to their seats, but the silence was no longer tense. It was contemplative, filled with the weight of possibility. Amara looked out the window at the expanse of clouds painted gold by the setting sun. She whispered again, too softly for anyone else to hear, "Let this not end when we land. Let it be the beginning." The aircraft sliced through the sky at 36,000 feet, yet inside the cabin the feeling was as if they were traveling not only across miles but across history. The confrontation had become testimony. Testimony had become protocol, and now the cabin itself seemed to wait for what the world outside would do with the truth. Amara Lewis sat quietly in seat 1A, her scarf folded neatly, her notebook resting on the table. The word inside it was burned into her spirit as if it were more than ink. Dignity. She traced it with her fingertip in silence, grounding herself. Though calm on the outside, she could feel the hum of responsibility coursing beneath her skin. Kayla Brooks lowered her phone for a moment, whispering with awe, "We're at almost 6 million viewers now. People are watching from every time zone. Hashtags are trending in real time. News outlets are already quoting what you said." Amara's eyes softened. "Then the world is awake. Let us hope it does not choose to fall asleep again." Margaret Ellison leaned forward from her seat, her silver hair gleaming under the cabin lights. "I've lived through decades of moments like this," she said, her voice firm but touched with sorrow. "But rarely has the truth been streamed live to millions. This time they cannot erase it. Not unless we let them." The businessman in 2C, who earlier had shrunk into silence, finally found his voice. "I admit I said nothing at first. I saw it happen and thought it would be easier not to get involved. But seeing how you stood your ground, I realized my silence was part of the problem. For that, I'm sorry." Amara looked at him directly, her expression calm but searching. "Your apology matters, but let it not end here. Speak when you see wrong again. Silence is a comfort for the privileged, but a weapon against the vulnerable." The man lowered his gaze, ashamed but moved. "I will remember." Daniel Ortiz moved down the aisle with quiet purpose, his service no longer mechanical but charged with meaning. Every glass of water he set down, every small courtesy he offered, seemed to affirm the dignity that had been denied earlier. He paused by Amara's seat. "Madam Lewis, Operations Control has relayed that your words are already being reviewed by Orion's legal division. They're drafting preliminary responses." Amara exhaled slowly. "Good. Let them draft. But this will not be shaped behind closed doors. The world is watching, and accountability must remain in the open." Kayla lifted her phone again. "You hear that? Everyone, she's not letting them hide behind statements. This will stay public." At the back of the cabin, Victoria Hale sat rigid, her face pale. Her authority was gone, but the sting of her downfall burned. She muttered to herself, "This will ruin me. One mistake, and everything is gone. Amara turned slightly, her gaze sharp. One mistake does not ruin a life. Ms. Hale, a pattern of cruelty does. This is not about ruin. It is about consequence. The words silenced Victoria into her seat once more. As the plane pressed onward, the quiet in the cabin was broken only by the buzz of passengers' phones. Notifications lit up the screens, news alerts, social media posts, video clips already circulating. Even those who had chosen not to record were now witnesses to their own story spreading across the globe. Margaret looked at her phone, her eyes wide. The evening news is already running it. Headlines everywhere. They're calling it the flight of dignity. Kayla's livestream comments confirmed it. CNN just broke in with the video. BBC is covering it too. This is everywhere. Amara closed her eyes briefly. The ripple had become a wave. But she knew waves could crash or they could carry change forward. The choice would depend on what she did next. She opened her eyes, her voice steady. The world has seen what happened. Now the world must see what comes next. When we land, this cannot be resolved with apologies and settlements. It must lead to structural change. The young mother holding her baby nodded softly. If it leads to real change, then maybe my daughter will never have to feel what you felt today. Those words struck Amara deep. She thought of her own childhood, of slights endured in silence, of her mother's quiet instructions on how to survive in spaces that did not welcome them. She thought of the slap just hours earlier and how easily her daughter could face the same unless change was made permanent. Her inner voice whispered, "This is why you endure, not for yourself, but for those who come after." Daniel returned with a folded note. From Captain Ward, he explained. "It's the preliminary written acknowledgement you requested." Amara opened it carefully. The handwriting was formal, deliberate. It admitted the slap, confirmed the improper attempt to remove her, and acknowledged her rightful authority under the dignity clause. She placed it gently inside her notebook. The record was now more than spoken. It was written. She looked around the cabin, her voice carrying, "This will be preserved. It is not just my story now. It is all of ours. Each of you gave your voice. Each of you stood against silence. That cannot be erased." Applause rose once again, softer this time but no less powerful. Kayla whispered into her phone, "She's holding a written record. This isn't just an incident anymore. It's history on paper." The sky outside was fading into twilight, streaks of orange and purple painting the horizon. The cabin lights glowed warmly, but inside the atmosphere felt almost sacred. The passengers were no longer merely travelers. They were witnesses of a movement that had leapt from one seat into the conscience of the world. Amara gazed out the window, her reflection overlapping the horizon. She whispered to herself, "When we land, the true battle begins." Margaret leaned closer, her voice low but firm. "And you won't be fighting it alone." Amara turned her head slightly, a faint smile touching her lips. For the first time since boarding, she allowed herself to believe that might be true. The hum of the engines carried them forward. The world below was already awakening to the story of what had happened in Seat 1A. And though the flight still had miles to go, Amara knew its impact had already landed. The descent began with a soft chime, the captain's voice cutting through the hush of the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for our arrival. Please fasten your seatbelts and ensure your belongings are secure." His tone was steady, but everyone in first class knew this was not an ordinary landing. They were not just arriving at a destination. They were arriving into history. Amara Lewis sat still in Seat 1A, her notebook resting on her lap. She had closed it again, but the word inside, dignity, seemed to radiate through the leather cover. She could feel its weight in her chest, Her cheek had healed from the sting of the slap, but the memory lingered like a scar carved into the air of the cabin. Kayla Brooks whispered to her live stream audience, "We're descending now. Reporters are waiting at the airport. Crowds too. Everyone knows what happened. This landing is going to be chaos." Her voice carried a mix of awe and nerves. Margaret Ellison sat upright, her hands folded neatly in her lap. This is the moment the world will measure. Amara. They've seen what happened up here. Now they'll see what you do when we touch the ground. Amara exhaled slowly. Her inner voice whispered again, steady and grounding. Remember, patience is power, but now is the moment to speak. The wheels touched down with a deep thud, the engines roaring as the plane slowed across the runway. Passengers clutched armrests, some whispering prayers, others holding their breath. By the time the aircraft rolled toward its gate, the energy in the cabin was electric. Phones buzzed with notifications. Messages poured in from friends, family, colleagues. Some passengers read headlines aloud in hushed voices. Billionaire passenger challenges discrimination at 37,000 feet. The flight of dignity. When the seatbelt light blinked off, the murmurs rose instantly. People stood, stretching, gathering bags, but their eyes all returned to Amara. She remained seated, calm, waiting. She knew the cabin doors would not simply open to an airport concourse. They would open to cameras, microphones, and judgment. Daniel Ortiz approached quietly, his hands clasped in front of him. "Madam Lewis," he said, his voice low but respectful, "the gate is surrounded. Press, security, executives. Operations Control has requested you disembark first." Amara shook her head slightly. "No. I will not sneak away while passengers who stood as witnesses are left behind. We walk out together." Daniel's throat tightened with emotion. "Then we'll do it your way." The door opened, and the jet bridge filled with voices and light. Security officers stood flanking the exit, but beyond them were reporters, cameras raised high, flashes already sparking. Questions flew like arrows. "Ms. Lewis, what happened on this flight? Do you plan to sue the airline? Is this the end of Orion Holdings? Are you calling for resignations?" Amara stepped forward into the brightness, her scarf catching the light, her posture unshaken. Behind her, Margaret, Kayla, Daniel, and the other passengers followed, forming a procession that looked more like a movement than a disembarkation. She paused before the microphones, her eyes sweeping the crowd. She felt the weight of millions of eyes, not just here, but watching through screens around the world. For a brief moment, silence fell, the hush of expectation thick as the humid air inside the terminal. Then she spoke. "Today, aboard this aircraft, I was struck. I was told I did not belong. I was treated not as a passenger, but as an intruder. But I chose not to endure in silence. I chose to stand. And because of the witnesses here, because of the voices that spoke truth, the silence was broken. Flashes exploded. Reporters leaned closer. Passengers nodded behind her, some with tears in their eyes. Amara continued, her voice rising with calm strength. "This is not only my story. This is the story of every traveler who has ever been humiliated, dismissed, or denied their humanity. This is the story of every person who has been told they do not belong. And today, for once, that story did not end in silence. It ended in accountability." The applause that followed was not from reporters, but from passengers who had walked out with her. Even strangers in the terminal who had watched the live stream on their phones joined, clapping with a mixture of awe and solidarity. She lifted her notebook, opening it for the cameras to see. Inside, the word dignity glared in bold ink. This word is more than a principle. It is now a protocol. The Dignity Protocol will ensure that what happened today cannot happen again. Testimony will be preserved, accountability will be immediate, and reform will be systemic. I will not allow this to fade into memory. It will become law. The terminal erupted in cheers. Reporters shouted questions, but Amara raised her hand gently, silencing them without force. This is not about punishment alone. It is about transformation. And let me be clear, the era of silence on discrimination in our skies ends today. Behind her, Kayla whispered into her phone, her voice breaking. You're hearing it live. The Dignity Protocol. This is history. Victoria Hale emerged from the jet bridge last, escorted by security. Her head lowered. Cameras flashed as reporters swarmed, but the focus remained on Amara. The contrast was stark, one stripped of authority, the other standing taller than ever. Margaret stepped beside Amara, placing a gentle hand on her arm. You've given them hope, she whispered. Amara's eyes softened, her voice quiet enough only for Margaret to hear. Hope is the beginning. Justice must follow. As she turned back to the cameras, she felt the presence of her father within her, his words echoing like a steady drumbeat. Patience is power. Dignity is law. For the first time since the slap, she smiled not out of triumph but out of certainty. The world had been forced to listen, and now it would be forced to change. As the plane touched down, it was no longer just an aircraft carrying passengers. It was a vessel carrying truth. A slap meant to demean had instead awakened a movement. Amara Lewis's calm strength reminded the world that dignity is not a privilege, it is a right. This story leaves us with questions we cannot ignore. How often has silence hidden the wounds of prejudice? How many times has convenience been chosen over justice? And how long will we allow systems to protect cruelty instead of humanity? Yet it also leaves us with hope. Hope that one act of courage can ripple into reform. Hope that witnesses can become allies. Hope that the skies and the world below them can be reshaped by those who refuse to bow their heads. May we carry this lesson beyond the cabin walls. May we see each traveler, each neighbor, each human being as worthy of dignity. And may we never forget that accountability is the first step toward lasting change. If this story moved you, let it move others too. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you can stand with us for the next story, because the fight for justice in our skies is only just beginning.